Welcome to this explainer of Daniel Kahneman's absolute masterpiece. We're going to dive directly into the hidden and honestly sometimes startling machinery of human thought. Today, we are unpacking what is literally a true revolution in behavioral economics. So, think about this for a second. Have you ever made a totally impulsive decision, only to realize later that your brain basically played a sneaky trick on you? We all really like to think of ourselves as highly rational, logical beings who carefully weigh all the evidence before making a move. But Kahneman, who actually won a Nobel Prize, by the way, alongside his collaborator Amos Tversky, proved that our minds are far more prone to biases, shortcuts, and systemic errors than any of us would ever care to admit. But here's the good news. By understanding the inner workings of your own mind, you can actually start to spot these cognitive blind spots before they trip you up. To keep our cognitive load light today, here's our roadmap. First, we'll meet your two minds, then look at mental shortcuts, explore priming, anchoring, and framing, unpack the fear of losing, uncover your two selves, and finally wrap up with how to make smarter decisions.
Okay, let's jump right into section 1, meet your two minds.
So imagine you have two completely different roommates living inside your head. On one side, we have System 1. This is your impulsive sidekick, constantly running in the background. It's fast, it's automatic, it's highly emotional, and it handles things effortlessly. Think about instantly reacting to a loud noise or calculating 1 plus 1. It's basically designed to keep you safe and save mental energy. On the other side, we have System 2. Now, this is your slow, deliberate, and deeply logical hero. It only really steps in when you need to, say, parallel park in a tight space or figure out something complex like 17 times 24. But here is the crazy secret about all of this. While System 2 totally considers itself the star of the show, it is incredibly lazy. It constantly accepts the rapid, sometimes deeply flawed suggestions of System 1 without ever bothering to double-check the facts. So why is System 2 so incredibly lazy? Well, thinking deeply burns actual physical energy. I mean, your pupils dilate, your heart rate spikes, your brain is burning through glucose. Because cognitive effort is physically taxing, your brain just naturally defaults to the law of least effort. So when System 2 gets busy or exhausted, you enter a state called ego depletion. Basically, when your mental energy is totally drained after a long, stressful day at work, your logical inner anchor weakens, and System 1 just takes over completely. This perfectly explains why we crave junk food, lose our tempers, or make terrible financial choices when we're tired. We're literally left at the mercy of our automatic impulses. Which brings us to Section 2, shortcuts and mental illusions. System 1 absolutely hates complex analysis, just hates it. So to function without getting paralyzed by endless amounts of data, it uses mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, to make rapid judgments. One of the absolute most famous ones is the availability heuristic. When you need to evaluate a risk, your brain doesn't pull out a statistics textbook, right? Instead, it simply asks, hey, how easily can I remember an example of this happening? Let's actually look at that shortcut in action. Think about vivid news coverage. If you watch a documentary on a shark attack, or you get a news alert on your phone about a plane crash, those terrifying images are super easy to retrieve from your memory. As a result, System 1 dramatically overestimates the probability of those things ever happening to you. But at the exact same time, because they aren't as dramatically televised, we completely ignore actual common statistical realities. Things like the very real dangers of car accidents or cardiovascular disease. Whatever is emotionally striking just feels far more frequent than it actually is. Kahneman summarizes this powerful phenomenon with a really simple, catchy phrase. What you see is all there is. You see, System 1 is a master at constructing a completely confident, highly believable narrative using only the tiny, limited slice of information that's immediately available to it. It almost never pauses to ask, wait a second, what crucial evidence am I missing here? This is exactly why first impressions are so incredibly durable. We build these sweeping conclusions on meager evidence because System 1 prioritizes a smooth, consistent story over the objective truth. Moving right along to Section 3, priming, anchoring, and framing. Because System 1 demands that consistent story we just talked about, we fall victim to things like the halo effect. This is when your overall impression of someone just spills over into totally unrelated traits. For example, if you meet someone who is super charming and physically attractive, your System 1 automatically assumes they're also highly intelligent, honest, and competent as a leader. You have absolutely zero evidence to back that up, but your brain forces the narrative to align anyway. You are also deeply influenced by priming, which are subtle words and environmental cues that shape your thoughts and movements without your conscious mind ever even realizing it's happening. And then we have anchors. Imagine you walk into a store, right? And you see a shirt marked down from this arbitrary starting number of $200 down to $100. System 1 immediately anchors your thought process to that higher starting price. Suddenly, $100 feels like an absolute steal, even if that shirt is realistically only worth $50. Your brain uses that very first number as a baseline reference point, and your lazy System 2 simply cannot adjust far enough away from it. This directly brings us to the framing effect. Imagine a doctor is presenting a surgical procedure to you. Mathematically speaking, a 90% survival rate and a 10% mortality rate are the exact same statistic. But that word mortality, that triggers an immediate visceral fear response in the brain, whereas survival feels reassuring and safe. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that our choices are dictated heavily by the emotional framing of words, rather than pure, cold logic. Let's dive into Section 4, the fear of losing. So here we find a really simple but profound ratio: loss aversion. This is actually a core pillar of prospect theory, the very thing that won Kahneman the Nobel Prize. The idea is that we do not evaluate wealth objectively. Instead, we evaluate it relative to gains and losses, and we are hardwired to hate losing far more than we like winning. In fact, roughly twice as much. Because of this exact ratio, people act highly irrationally. We'll happily lock in a small guaranteed gain just to be safe, but if we face a guaranteed loss, suddenly we become incredibly reckless, taking massive, dangerous gambles just to avoid a definitive loss. This intense fear of losing directly creates what's called the sunk cost fallacy. System 1 just refuses to walk away. Instead of cutting our losses when a business venture is failing or, say, a relationship has turned toxic, what do? We double down. We pour more money and time into a sinking ship simply to avoid acknowledging that the initial investment was a waste. Similarly, the endowment effect shows that simply owning something makes your brain value it way more than it's actually worth out in the real world, because selling it feels like a painful loss. All right, Section 5. 2 selves, 1 memory. The key thing to understand here is that you are not just one unified decision maker. You're actually split into 2. The experiencing self is the you that is living right now, feeling life second by second. But the remembering self, that's the archivist. It looks back, it curates your memories, and most importantly, it is the self that dictates your future choices. And the crazy part is, these 2 versions of you do not perceive the world in the same way at all. See, the remembering self basically ignores how long an experience lasts. Instead, it relies on the peak end rule. It judges an event based almost entirely on its highest emotional peak and how it concluded. So let's say you have a 2-week, magnificent, totally relaxing vacation, but on the very last day, your flight is delayed and the airline loses your luggage. Your experiencing self had a great 2 weeks, but your remembering self, it's going to log that entire trip as a disaster, based purely on that terrible ending. We make choices about our lives based on the heavily edited stories curated by our remembering self. Finally, we reach Section 6, smarter daily decision-making. Let's translate all these psychological insights into 5 key practical takeaways for you. First, just recognize your mind's laziness. When a big decision looms, intentionally slow down to wake up System 2. Second, always question how options are presented to you. Beware of loaded language and those arbitrary starting prices. Third, respect your own fear of losing. Try to recognize when you're caught in a sunk cost trap and just cut your losses early. Fourth, distrust high confidence. Kahneman found that highly confident experts are often no better than random chance in complex environments. We suffer from an illusion of validity, so rely on objective data, not smooth stories. And fifth, actively manage your peak end moments. If you want a good memory of a trip or a conversation, make sure you focus on creating a strong peak and ending on a real high note. Your mind is an absolute miracle of evolution. But, as we've seen today, it is definitely not a perfect calculator. But here is the great takeaway. Now that you know the hidden biases operating behind the scenes, you have the power to step off autopilot. You don't have to be a victim to System 1's emotional framing or its intense fear of loss. So, knowing what you know now about how your brain really works, how will you approach your very next major choice? It might just be time to let System 2 take the wheel.